What are the red flags, the signposts, the warning signs, and the things that we can learn? Because we just really comprehensively thrashed one nuclear threat, as we know. There are others. So we're going to be learning from what's just occurred, and just taking a little bit of caution with us into the future. My name is Scott. I've been working with a great little crew, including a little group called Don't Nuke the Climate, for the last 12, 15 months or so. And so really my job here tonight is to hear from these geniuses. We're going to be reasonably brisk and informal. There'll be a heap of time for Q&A later down in the session. The main thing I want you all to sit with, if you're here outside the election cycle, outside all the pressure and fizz and pop and all the stuff, it means you're joining us in some sense of celebration. So that's what I would like to just hold to tonight. We had a really important win, and it's because of the folk on this call and our wider community, our wider circle. It wouldn't have happened without you and without all of us collectively. So that's my thanks. We're all in a good mood. I hope you've all had a lovely day, and thank you for joining us for the last in our series of webinars, apart from the other ones that we're probably yet to do. It's lovely to see you're here. Kirsten, what on earth just happened?
What on earth did just happen, and what have I done to my screen? I'm trying to see. There we go. Hi, everyone. So great to see all your faces, and I feel like I will say, wow, look at where everyone's here from. That's so cool. Yeah, I'm joining from Wurundjeri country in Naarm. Really happy to see your faces, and thanks so much, Scott, for that beautiful intro. And just, yeah, the sense of celebration is really significant. Obviously ongoing, and yeah, this is wonderful to see all these people who, yeah, so I'm going to talk briefly about, yeah, just a little bit of what happened, and everyone on this call was involved in different aspects and knows intimately the work that they were involved in. But also I just want to touch on some of the info that we have about how the issue of nuclear actually influenced how people voted. And so there's been quite a lot of polling around that. So I just wanted to share some of that data, because I guess that's the tangible evidence that we have that the really amazing work that everyone on this call was involved in did make a difference, and that the concern that we've all had for a long time about nuclear has really rippled out. And I guess what Jim and Dave will talk about more is how we continue to harness that and maintain an understanding of the significance of that. So yeah, I mean, I can see people on here from lots of the locations that I was working with. I was lucky enough to be able to work with the communities where there were proposed nuclear power stations, or there were the sites where the power stations were proposed for, and got to be up close with some of the incredible resistance work that happened, which was super exciting. And I'm just looking at you, Robin, and thinking about that fantastic event we had in Sturt right up at the end there, when we got the bonus experience of Peter Dutton turning up the next day. And certainly everyone who's on the call from Gippsland, and all the incredible different kinds of actions that happened down there. The, Nanas Against Nukes and all of those big events. I mean, John, who's on the call, did amazing things at marketplaces and, really hit the front lines, as did Adrian. Anyway, everyone on here did something. I won't name every person, I'll lose my minutes. But I want to share with you, so one of the things Solutions for Climate did after the election was a wrap of the polling that was done, of which there's a really broad range. So I'm just going to share one page of text, and I'm really happy to make this available afterwards. So don't feel like you need to, certainly don't try and write anything down or anything like that. But just so that, can people see that? Is that an all right size? Yep, cool. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I can share this, but really just, there was a lot of polling done with relation to nukes, because as people would be aware, as the campaign rolled out, it became increasingly evident that this was an issue people were responding to. And as I think everyone on this call probably knows, there was a moment where the Libs just stopped mentioning it. The coalition stopped talking about nuclear power because they realised that it wasn't doing them any favours. And one of my favourite examples of seeing that they'd done that, because I was sort of denying it when people asked them, but somebody sent us one of those, the little, flyers from the local candidates that were put into people's letterboxes. And there was one of those, and there'd clearly been a late minute change. And so under the energy section, it said their descriptor, which had been renewables, gas, and nuclear. And they decided to take the word nuclear off, but they hadn't taken the little plus sign away. So it said renewables plus gas plus space, and then close brackets. So guess what was there? So it was very clear that they really were feeling it. they decided to remove that. And I know people have got lots of examples of those kind of fumbles. So yeah, as Scott said, a little bit of schadenfreude for us. But yeah, so this list here, you can see there's heaps of examples. I mean, one of my favorites here is that the second most popular reason for voters to vote against the coalition was, and this is a line straight out of the Labor Party playbook, but that the $600 billion plan would require cuts to pay for it. So the Labor Party was running that line really hard, but it's worth noting that that $600 billion came from the Smart Energy Council. And so those, it's an expert body, but there was an effort made by the coalition to discredit that number, but it really stuck. And people really knew that the number the Libs were saying about the cost was inaccurate, and people believed that. And so cost is obviously one of the really big things about nuclear, but I guess what our responsibility now is to let people know that, and remind people there's more to it. Like one of the difficulties, I guess, was that cost and time were two of the big issues that people really latched onto. There was a lot of concern about water, which is really significant. And in some cases, the broader conversation about sourcing the fuel, so uranium mining, and what to do with waste came up, but still, I think it would be fair to say secondary. So a lot of these conversations were to do with, concern about nuclear power, but not necessarily an understanding of the full spectrum of the issues. And so that, I guess, is something that we need to continue to work on. So, I mean, just as another example, 63% of women said that they don't want to live near a nuclear power station. And 57% said they don't think transporting nuclear waste is worth the risk. So there was a lot of stuff about risk, and the really fantastic work that Don't Nuke the Climate did around, I think people would have seen those plume maps, which were the radioactive plumes from the Fukushima disaster mapped onto the 7 sites to show if something similar happened in those locations, where the impact would be found. And that was really wonderful work that the Don't Nuke the Climate crew did. And that had a really, really powerful impact because those visuals are just so strong. And it was really easy to see where the impact would flow to, and it's very wide reaching. So there's a whole lot of other stats. So I'm not going to read you this whole document, and I'm sure there's going to be a follow-up email and we can include this in it. But again, there's another reference there to the cost, which I think is one of the ones that's a really useful one to be aware of. Now, the other thing, I'm conscious of time, the other thing I just wanted to make sure I did mention, and we're not writing this down, so we might even clip this out of the bit that we make public, but there was a group doing some targeted ads, and they were very so it was related to Solutions for Climate, coordinated by Solutions for Climate, but not us specifically. I'll take that share off now. Oh, thanks, Sana. Great. And we were running sort of fairly low budget, very simple sort of fact-based ads, and we were really pushing those out in all of the locations where the power stations were proposed. And we did some pretty strong analysis around that, and we saw swings at the booth level in Lithgow with relation to that. And we kept running those ads beyond the election date, particularly in Maranoa. And we had reports from a staff member in David Littleproud's office, who obviously wasn't a big fan of nuclear power, because they let us know that they were getting a lot of calls from people saying, we didn't vote for you because of this, and you really need to change your tune. So I think from that perspective, and this again I assume is something we'll talk about later tonight, that because the National Party have really held on to this as their policy, I think there's opportunity there for us to really harness the response and the sort of public sentiment on that topic. So yeah, happy to talk more or take a few questions or just keep us rolling along. But yeah, as I said, I can share that, and there's also a broader report, which the Climate Action Network Australia will be making public really soon, which just talks about all of the nuclear, renewables and climate related work that was done and the impact that we saw in terms of outcomes. Some analysis at seat level, there was lots of marginal seat work done, but also more broadly.
It looks like Scott might have frozen on us. Thanks so much, Kirsten. This was really great, and it would be really great for people to have, and for us to have that doc with all those that data, because that looks really interesting. Next up is going to be Jim Green. Dr. Jim Green is a national nuclear free campaigner with Friends of the Earth Australia, and he's going to explain a bit about the current debate around nuclear power in a national party and what the repercussions that might have in the future. Take it away, Jim.
Thanks, Sana, and I would like to acknowledge the Kaurna traditional owners here in Adelaide. So I'm just going to summarise where the coalition is at with its nuclear policy. That's pretty much all I'm going to talk about tonight, so it won't take too long, but it is a little bit confusing and perplexing. They've just been smashed by nukes at the election, yet they're going to retain their pro-nuclear policy. It's pretty strange. What the coalition has agreed to is a so-called compromise whereby they abandoned the plan for 7 nuclear power plants at 7 identified sites. And all they're committing to do is to repeal the federal laws banning nuclear power. And often the way they'll put that is that they'll repeal the laws. If it stacks up economically, then the private sector can lead the project. So that's where they've landed. They've also said that other aspects of the policy are up for review, so there might be more details. Ted O'Brien did say that they would be looking at specific sites or regions, so that might cause some problems for them. I don't know if he means the existing 7 sites that have already been targeted or others. So why would the coalition come up with this compromise? Well, firstly, the Nationals made a demand of staying within the coalition, as you will have seen last week. So in some senses, it is and always has been the tail wagging the dog, the Nationals imposing this policy on the coalition, initially as a trade-off for the Nationals signing on to net zero by 2050. And last week it was retaining the nuclear policy to keep the coalition together. But there are also very prominent pro-nuclear advocates within the Liberal Party, not least Ted O'Brien, who was leading this nuclear policy as Shadow Energy Minister and is now Shadow Treasurer and Deputy Leader of the party. And there are plenty of others. There was Jacinta O'Brien, and the guy who won the seat from Melbourne, and a number of others who were stridently pro-nuclear within the coalition. Why is that? Well, to some extent, they believe their own nonsense, their own claims about nuclear. There's this hostility to renewables, which kind of is another tail wagging the dog. If you don't support renewables, well, what choices have you got? You've got coal, gas, or nuclear, and they haven't been openly talking about building and opening new coal plants, but I feel like that's something that's coming onto the agenda more and more. That's obviously something that people like Senator Matt Canavan has talked about frequently and loudly, but I feel like there's a brewing sentiment within the coalition that that's what they want to do, but they're just not prepared to say it out loud at the moment. Again, you'd have to shake your head. They've just got absolutely smashed in a climate election, and they're thinking of openly promoting building new coal power plants, not to mention subsidising the existing ones so they can operate for longer. It's pretty crazy stuff. So again, why do they hold on to the nuclear policy? Well, as it was before the election, it gives them a fig leaf of a climate policy. Albeit not a very credible one. So anyway, the future of nuclear is tied up within these discussions in the coalition over net zero and climate change, their hostility to renewables, and this looming idea that they're going to start openly promoting coal, in addition to what they've already done, which is to say they're going to massively increase the use of gas. So it's a very problematic compromise. It means that the coalition goes to the next election with a nuclear target on its back. It will lose votes because of the nuclear policy, as it did in the election we've just held. I had a guesstimate that the coalition may have lost 11 seats in the May 3 election because of their nuclear policy. We don't know how their watered down policy will fare in the next election, but anyway, it's certainly not going to help them. The nuclear policy makes even less sense because it will be at least 3 years and possibly 6 years or more before they could even get started on a nuclear power program. And so that means there is literally zero prospect of nuclear making the slightest contribution to net zero by 2050. And, you know, that is understood by the coalition. Some of the skeptics within the coalition have made exactly that point, that the timelines just don't work. And also this idea of simply repealing the laws. Well, I mean, the first problem is it's hard to imagine that getting past the Senate, but even if it did, the commercial sector is not going to jump in to build nuclear reactors in Australia. So they're essentially retaining a policy which is unpopular and undeliverable. And it begs the question as to why don't they simply ditch nukes? And I guess you could say their watered down policy is a stepping stone towards doing exactly that. It's a face-saving exercise that solves some problems for the coalition, but it's taking a significant backward step from their pre-election policy. The worst case scenario is that the coalition goes to the next 2, 3, 4 elections promoting nuclear power. It's not so new or shocking to millions of Australians as it was this time. It just becomes part of the furniture that the coalition promotes nuclear power, and people get used to it, and they're not likely to win in 3 years, but maybe in 6, 9, 12 years we get a coalition government with a pro-nuclear power policy. Also, commercial nuclear power is not viable in Australia or anywhere in the world, but commercial nuclear power propped up by many billions of dollars of taxpayer subsidies is something that could possibly fly in Australia, as it has in, say, the UK and the US and some other countries. So that's something we should be nervous about. And the worst case scenario also, you know, as I was saying before the election, leave nuclear out of it. With or without nuclear power, a coalition government is going to derail the renewable energy transition. And it would not be at all straightforward or simple for a subsequent Labor government to simply pick it up and run with it again. We will have lost an awful lot of time and momentum and supply chains and confidence and everything. So a coalition government could and probably would totally derail the renewable energy transition, with all sorts of consequences for the environment and emissions and for the expense of the power we all use. So a coalition government would, its energy policy would be a major national disaster with or without nuclear power. The Labor Party, well, I don't think it's ever been so solid in its united opposition to nuclear power. Maybe there's a few people there that Dave Sweeney would know about, but not very many. And one of the good things that happened in the election campaign was that the two unions that had been isolated as pro-nuclear power unions, namely the AWU and the Mining and Energy Union, they both opposed Dutton's nuclear power plan and did so publicly and repeatedly. So that was hugely welcome. So within the Labor Party and industrial Labor, there's so little support, and it's just impossible to see that changing in the foreseeable future. And just to finish off on a high note, it was really nice that 2 days after the election, the South Australian Liberal Party dropped their pro-nuclear power policy. They were promising to hold a royal commission, and they had already appointed a shadow minister for nuclear readiness. But the leader of the South Australian Liberal Party said nuclear has been comprehensively rejected by the electorate, and it's now been dumped by the SA Liberals. So that was a really positive outcome. That means if the coalition government, a coalition opposition, wanted to go to the next election supporting nuclear power in the same 5 states, that they would be opposed by the Liberal and National parties in all 5 of those states, and opposed by the governments in all 5 of those states. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you, Kirsten. Jim described their present political circumstances of the Liberals and Nationals as confusing and perplexing. I'd just like to add extremely funny. It's very funny. Like, after everything they just put us all through, particularly the frontline communities, but everybody who's been working on this like a year, 15, 18 months of our lives. It's just really funny, that expression of the tail wagging the dog. I mean, the dog is dead, but they still seem content to just drag it around behind them. I just find it very funny. Anyway, as we know, anybody who's been around the block, and I know there's folk on this call who've been at this for way longer than me, who've really put in literally decades of work on this, we know that things can change. And we're riding high at the moment, and this thing's just had a huge whack. But there is a very high degree of political amnesia, particularly with the kind of media culture that we're saturated in. Things could change. And so it's really good to have Dave here from the Australian Conservation Foundation, just to put up a couple of flags of things to watch for, because they do have a target painted on their back, or it's the equivalent of a radioactive political kick me sign. It's going to be up to us to stick around to make sure that they get a kicking if they try it on again. And I'm reasonably sure that that's what Dave's got in mind for us this evening. So please welcome Dave Sweeney from the Australian Conservation Foundation.
Thank you very much, Scott. And this is a great crew here tonight, and I'm really pleased to be talking to you. I'm talking to you tonight from Naarm, from the land of the Kulin Nations, and I just wanted to give a particular shout out to Jim, who just spoke a minute ago. Like, Jim's knowledge of the nuclear sector is really deep, and his generosity in sharing it and in empowering and tooling us up to be even better critics that generosity is really profound, and it's been enormously effective. Like, all sorts of work that Jim does above the radar and below it has been great. Don't want to call out too many individual peoples, because it'll just be like a wrap of your names, because it's been fantastic. But I do want to give a special shout out to probably the longest distance joiner of tonight, Leona Morgan, over on country in New Mexico. And Leona has been like is a stalwart of fighting nuclear mining, uranium mining and nuclear waste dumping and transporting proposals. And Leona just, I know they're tough days with Trump and madness afoot in that continent. So some solidarity from all of us across the water, and take some energy from this big win, because that's what it is. And that's pretty much the first thing I wanted to start with is, well done, everyone. This is an extraordinary result. Like, you just cast your mind back to June 2024, and Peter Dutton said he would be happy to have a referendum on nuclear power. And then we had 11 months of misinformation and disinformation, of big spends, of advertising, of concerted lobbying from the Mineral Council of Australia, from the Centre for Independent Studies, from the Institute of Public Affairs, from Nuclear for Australia, from We Planet, from Nuclear for Climate. Like, there was, coming out of the woods and the woodwork, scores of voices lining up, academics who people have never heard of, turning up to profess how smart and bold this was. And on May 3, that referendum on nuclear power delivered a clear and a widespread and an absolutely pivotal and welcome rejection of nuclear. Now, that's less than a month ago, and we should still be like, hooray. Great work. Congratulations to everybody. And it's really important to note too that wasn't by accident. It was because of sustained and heavy lift and work by many people. The impacted local communities, Nanas Against Nukes in the Latrobe Valley, TOs and Corflutes in Collie, billboards in the Hunter, barrels in Brisbane, First Nation advocacy around Port Augusta, just so much more. And then scoping up from the 7 sites, there was great work by the core anti-nuclear environment and anti-nuclear groups, from Friends of the Earth, from ACF, from Don't Nuke the Climate, from Nuke Free WA, and lots of state conservation councils and more. There were really important efforts from our wider allies and partners and fellow travellers. Groups like the ETU, the Electrical Trades Union, were great. Many of the trade unions, as Jim said, CANA, the Climate Action Network, really stellar work done by Solutions for Climate. Massively important, massively effective. The Smart Energy Council, Solar Citizens Climate Council. Like, this work was unified, it was aligned, and it was enormously effective, particularly given that it was largely organic. Like, it wasn't like a cabal sat down and mapped out this plan. It was like people brought their skills and their skill set to a shared set of understandings. We communicated, but we didn't direct or take directions, and it flowed very well. That was really important. There's a couple of other implications from this big win too that I think it's really important to just take a moment or hold in your head, because this is just my reflection, but I think it might be shared, is like, I was dreading May 4 if we had a Dutton government. I was dreading seeing my fellow citizens in the shops, in the tram, wherever. But it's restored my faith, if you like, in the common sense and common decency of the common people. We're all common, but you know what I mean? It's like, we're not America yet, and we won't be. The other thing that I think is really important is they don't talk about it, because why would you? But it's a significant slap in the face to the Murdoch press, which is a toxic press. Not everyone that works in it is toxic, but the whole construct is. And they, for that preceding 11 months, were just running nuclear, way to go, time to courage, big, bold vision. Renewables don't really work and people don't like it, because I met someone at a pub. And across the country, Australians rejected that. Yet that was a diet that was coming through in the main tabloid papers. So there's lots of really good news, and there's lots of reasons to celebrate, but there's less good news too. Like nukes, it's not for no reason that it has half-lives. It's not dead. It's a little bit like the SBS movie. The villagers are dancing around the fire down in the village square, and the final scene is the hand comes out of the crypt, the coffin in the crypt in the castle on the hill. And that hand, well, right now, it's got a National Party membership card. They didn't lose at the election. I think that's really important. From the perspective of the National Party, they didn't lose. They lost one New South Wales senator. They nearly got a Victorian House of Reps seat. They retained all the rest of their seats. So in the perspective of the Nationals, when you hear them speak, their view is the Liberals cost the coalition the election, not the Nats. Look at the vote. We're all here. And unlike the Liberals, who are shell-shocked and saying, what do we do? How do we reinvent ourselves? How do we connect with contemporary Australia? The Nationals are thinking that reflection is what happens in the makeup mirror before you have your Sky TV interview. They are not into reflection at all. There were extraordinary scenes on May 3 with that map of Australia going, red is too bold an adjective for Labor politics, but the map goes red, and not just in a couple of areas, uniformly. So Australians uniformly rejected what the coalition was offering. And a big part of that was the toxic, abrasive, divisive politics. And a big part of that was nuclear power, with its risks and its costs and everything. And as Kirsten said, we played a really important role in ensuring that at least some of the messaging and some of the stuff that got out wasn't just about, it takes too long and costs too much. It was also that it's too dangerous, it's too toxic, it's a burden into the future, it impacts adversely on people's lives. Extraordinary scenes since, with the breakup and the makeup. Like, it's a mini-series, breakup and the makeup of the coalition. And in all of this, nukes as an issue featured highly, from commentaries and to cartoonists. And that should be captured, celebrated and reminded. So for a while, nukes should be dead, but it isn't, and it won't be. And my sense and projection of this is in line with Jim's. Most Libs will say little. There's some, Tim Wilson and Ted O'Brien and others, who are true believers, but most aren't. Or they either not, or else they see it as a political liability. And so most Libs will say little, but when they're pushed, they'll say, oh, we should consider all options and everything should be on the table and let's let the market decide. And that will seem reasonable to their worldview. The Nats will be off the leash to seek to use this fig leaf-like, the only form of vegetation they'll be actively seeking to preserve, to undermine and delay the renewable rollout and to use nuclear as the alternative. So we've had a massive win, but it's not the final win. So from here, some thoughts of what I think is some ways forward and some steps forward. I think one is it's really important that we claim the win. Like many of us on this call and many of us in this broader movement and the people in our address books struggle, push, Sisyphus like that, rock back up the hill, keep going, pull on the boots and do it again. And sometimes in the fight for justice, you know, the arc bends, but gee, it takes a long time to bend. This is the arc has gone, wow, bang. It's curved, arched. We should celebrate that. We should tell the story. We should tell the story that people power has defeated nuclear power, that our future is renewable, not radioactive, and that on May 3, Australia as a nation, Penrith to Perth, Darwin to Devonport, Australia as a nation voted down nuclear. We should reinforce the story. Really important to do this because this is our bulwark, this is our defence, that nuclear is politically toxic. Now, you know, we would say that because we don't like it, but so does every other Australian. Howard took nuclear to the Australian people in 2007. He lost the election, he lost his seat. Dutton took nuclear to the Australian people in 2025. He lost the election, he lost his seat. How was that for a sweet moment? So we need to pass that on so that when the Libs are sitting there, they go, no, 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 no. It's one thing to say, let the market decide. It's another thing to say, we're going to shovel cash and put our cachet and link our horse to that car. So we need to maintain our links with the key allies that we built. And we need to continue to contest nukes and to support the renewable rollout, because that will be where the rubber hits the road. They will try and stop the renewable rollout to turn around and say, see, told you so, it can't work, we need nuclear, or we need increased fossils. We need to work as the anti-nuclear we with the wider climate movement, because we haven't always been super close. We got close and solid over that election period. We need to build on that and work on that, grow those relationships to consider so that the climate movement sees that getting nukes off the table is an essential precondition to growing renewables and getting meaningful climate action. We need to encourage and demand and expect and work to ensure that political parties and players don't blink, that they don't trade the federal prohibition. It's not a moratorium, it's a prohibition or a ban on nukes. It's not a pause, it's a ban. They can't trade that because that would give nukes legitimacy, it feeds the myth, it increases uncertainty, which is what the renewable wreckers want. They want to inject uncertainty at every point. It would just lead to further calls for more. Oh, now we need a subsidy. Now we need this. Now we need that. There would be a conga line of supplicants in Canberra talking nuclear because you don't get a result if you appease a bully. And that's what this sector is. The other thing is, and why we should need to keep those bans, is because economic rationalism is not rational. People will say, oh, look, if you lift the ban, if you look at it, no one seriously is going to invest in nuclear because it doesn't make sense, et cetera, and they're all utterly correct. And we all know that. But there's some pretty kooky people that are driven by pretty hidden agendas. And for example, Clive Palmer has spent touching $200 million in the last 2 federal elections. Gina Rinehart loves nukes. Like there could be a collection of the over-cashed and under-considered who get together in a passion project to prove a point. So it's not about rational. So it's important that we tell Labor, Teals, Greens not to blink. Now, I don't think there's a high level of concerned that they will, but those things need to be said and be clear and above the line. Above all, we need to work with people to ensure that we grow renewables. So that means that renewables isn't just a mad push that further displaces environment and people, but we grow renewables in a way that is beneficial for people and nature, and that makes nuclear utterly irrelevant. And that's particularly important because one of the things that the anti-nuclear movement has deep in our DNA, Don't Nuke Australia, one of the things that we have deep in our DNA is the acknowledgement and the respect and the understanding and liaisons with First Nations here. And we've got to make sure when the renewable stuff comes, that those who have suffered at the nuclear industry, at the fossil industry, those who have suffered at the forefront and the footprint of colonial power are this time beneficiaries with the rollout of renewable power. There's other issues that are coming, and I'll just flag them, but we need to keep the contest on uranium. We need to track movements on radioactive waste, which is in a little bit of a hiatus in some ways, and especially call now that free, prior and informed consent be a requirement, like a legislative requirement of any future waste management thinking. We need to contest AUKUS, and we need to pick up a pen and show that the penny is mightier than the sword and sign the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Now, all those things have drop-down boxes of tasks and difficulty and all those stuff. They have challenges, but they all have credible pathways to success. And that's the body of work for us to do in the future. But tonight, that my sense of the focus was on power, and we have smashed it. Over the past 11 months, we have stood up to it, we've withstood that, and we've smashed it. Now we need to stop the nuts and the gnats from collecting the broken pieces of that atomic dream and trying to glue them back together. And in so doing, we can then get on with our broader and winning efforts to build a nuclear-free Australia.
That was very, very serious talk and yet somehow wildly entertaining. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks so much.
You could have gone on a bit more. In fact, I'd be happy to hear from any of our speakers again. We've got another 15 minutes or so together, and we are going to keep to time because everybody's got a lot going on. But I'm really happy to open the floor to hear what people heard, because just quickly skimming through the list of folk on this call tonight, there's folk here from every state and territory who performed frontline roles or roles behind the scenes in making sure that we checkmated that most recent nuclear push. But in particular, while we've got these three adorable geniuses on the call, if you've got questions for Kirsten, Dave, or Jim, with the various degrees of enormous expertise that you heard them expressing just now, then now's your time. So I don't know whether I would be able to see everybody's hands if you throw them up. So maybe just go ahead, unmute, otherwise we won't see or hear you. If you've got any questions, please go ahead. We've got a little bit of time.
Yeah, so you've already said it, Dave, but I'd just like to reiterate it and get some further comment on it. But I think that the best way to prevent the nuclear energy monster coming back again is to actually make the renewables, energy efficiency, demand side management, whatever, sensible approach actually make a lot of progress in the next 3 years or 6 years if we've got that long. And I'm not sure to what extent we, as the anti-nuclear movement, have a key role to play in that. But if there isn't much progress and the obstructors obstruct and the people who are trying to build renewable energy plants don't respect the environmental and other concerns of the local people, then nuclear might start to sort of sound attractive to some people again. So what role do you see that we have in furthering the renewable project?
I might just jump for that one first, and then others if want to respond. But yeah, well put, Philip, and I agree. I think that that you completely negate nuclear power if people are getting assured affordable power from another source that's not nuclear. And that in this country is renewables. And the way to kill nuclear is to build renewables. Labor were elected on a very clear policy of renewable transition. So they need to be reminded and animated that they have to deliver. It's not good enough to just have one people's support in principle. They have to deliver. And we've probably got a role in that to remind them not to become complacent, to remind them, like Scott said, that things can change, but also we understand really at a really deep level social license. And so generally we're using it, or we're harnessing it and conscious of it to stop a negative nuclear project. We've probably got a role to play in pivoting a bit to use our skills and understanding of that very important concept to help facilitate it being realised with the rollout of renewables. I don't want to overstate our ability or capacity to do that, but sometimes the insights that we can bring to conversations in the table can be really important. There's a role. Australia now will likely get COP31. It will likely be held late 2026 in Adelaide. There's a real opportunity there to tell Australia and the world the negative story of the impact, particularly for First Nations, of nuclear, and the positive opportunities, and South Australia is a good example of the opportunities for realising renewables. So that could be a significant mobilising and focusing area. Jim said a point which is a warning point that we shouldn't lose either. Those in the coalition who have been defeated will now be looking for pieces of optimism. And one piece they say is that we put nuclear, we didn't win, in fact, we got smashed, but we put nuclear on the national agenda, not just the Nationals agenda, the national agenda. And so they will say, we've broken the hoodoo, we can come back to this and talk about it now. We need to say the hoodoo cost you government, cost you utterly, and Australians have rejected it. So there's a contest for certainty, and we've got a good role to play in providing certainty that nuclear has no role in Australia, and for all its complexities to work constructively to get sustainable renewables rolled out.
Thanks, Philip. Do anybody else want to take that one on?
Yeah, I'll jump in just quickly, Scott.
Yeah, go, Jim.
The requirements for AUKUS in terms of support and facilities and infrastructure and education and absolutely everything, it's pretty alarming. But, part of that also is that the argument that the coalition was running with, that Australia needs nuclear power to underpin AUKUS, just to provide that level of expertise and familiarity and experience. So that's an argument that's not going to go away. It's not a terribly strong argument, but it still will be there. Another one is this idea of nuclear power as a stepping stone to nuclear weapons. Well, it's not just an idea, it's happened all around the world, including Australia 50 years ago. But at the moment, you can hear right-wing think tanks saying that, we can't rely on the US nuclear umbrella anymore. We've got to be more self-sufficient, and we need to have a mature conversation about whether Australia should develop nuclear weapons. Currently, that's what we hear from the right-wing think tanks. If DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, ever settles on that view, then we are in big trouble, whether it's Labor government or coalition government. We're not there yet, but that's something, again, to keep an eye out for.
That's great, Jim. Thank you. I think, John, did you have your hand up earlier? And then I've got John and then Brenda.
Yeah, I did. Two things. One, I received an email today from Will Shackle saying we've still got to fight, give me money. So they're still out there. The second component is, in a previous life, I was a software engineer. Everything is logical. I understand logic. I don't understand peopleware. But to me, there's a fairly logical argument, which may not cut the mustard with those who propose nuclear. But that is, you've just been handed a 6-year delay, seriously. And paint a picture of where we will be in 15 to 20 years. And the answer is we will have solved the problem. Come hell or high water, we will have solved the problem, and there will be no space for nuclear. So please paint me a picture of how you see nuclear fitting into the renewable world of Australia 2040, because frankly, guys, you have missed the boat. You've seriously missed the boat, and you cannot paint a picture of how you would fit in 15 years from now. Your time is gone. Sorry. And challenge them to say how it will work and how it will fit in the world of Australia 2040, because I can't see it.
Thank you, John. That kind of clicks a little bit into Philip's point, doesn't it? That we now have to build out the renewable platform as though our lives depend on it, and that just they lose 1 or 2 terms of government and then try to bring nuclear back for the 2050s. All being well, the job's been done by then. Any other comments on that? Because I feel like that argument is sound. All right, Brenda.
Listening to Kirsten do the wrap up of the 6 nuclear reactor sites over east, I couldn't help feeling a bit left out, because things in Collie were not so good, despite our best efforts. Rick Wilson won the seat. Rick Wilson, Liberal, Rick Wilson won the seat again safely, and he's bragging in the South West Times that his vote went up in the Collie seats. So he looked at it as a little mini referendum by 13%. So in the Collie seats, he got 45% of the primary vote, which was up from 32% last time. And he just stirs. He's an evil bastard. He'll just be stirring the pot and just making sure that all the proposed wind farms for Darkin and areas around Collie are just going to be, politically sabotaged by so-called community groups, etc., all that sort of stuff. So it's not quite such a happy picture there. Yeah, sorry. Just needed to get that on the register, that Collie's one to watch. Oh, and the other part of that is that I know this sounds a bit paranoid, but some of us would not be surprised at anything Roger Cook would do. He's just another Mark McGowan after the last few, after the Woodside thing and just everything he says. I can just imagine him saying, pushing for lifting the moratorium. And then, if Roger Cook pushes for something and rings elbow, what happens? So, yeah, sorry. It's not good. But everything else is good. So, great.
It's not good, but it's extremely important, because that's more than just an asterisk. And I spent 40 years in WA, so I feel duly chastised about being a little bit East Coast focused and taking my eye off the Great Southwest. So that's, I suppose, another really good argument for staying vigilant and remembering that things can change. And I'm not kidding. If you go back 15 years, probably less than that, 10, the idea that you could announce a nuclear submarine port for Western Australia and South Australia, and there'd be nuke subs and there'd be nuclear armed bombers in the north, you would have just been laughed out of the debate. And things can swing sharply and viciously. So that's, I guess, partly why it's important that we're on the call. And also, I guess maybe before we wrap up, we've only got a couple of minutes left. If anybody wants to get in one last quick question, I reckon we'd take it. Is spread the knowledge. Like, it's a bit of a bruising time to be doing this work. We just had a really important win with that footnote important that Brenda's just reminded us of. The gas campaigners need us now. Lock the Gate need us. Like, crew need us all over the place. We held off the nuclear threat, and we're going to keep doing that. But we also learned a lot, I think. And so go share that expertise in your communities and with the other groups or the people who might be having a real tough time, because it's valuable and it's rare, the knowledge that we've managed to accumulate over the last 15 months or so. It's all one big interconnected campaign, as Dave is very fond of reminding us. It's not a question of nuclear versus fossil versus renewables. It's dirty, polluting, extractive energy against the clean energy future that we're all trying to build, and that is actually well underway. Dave, do you want to grab the last word?
Yeah, I wanted to just, I acknowledge absolutely, Brenda, that there will be enormous challenges and there will be really negative efforts in that. But I also wanted to maybe just give an unlikely person the last word, which was the 7 News political editor, Mark Riley, not a card-carrying member of ACF or Friends of the Earth or Don't Nuke the Climate.
Right.
But on the panel on Saturday night on May 3, Riley said, the party that chose nuclear energy as its policy has exploded in a nuclear bomb set on them by the voters tonight. And I think we need to tell that story. There's lots of complexities, but the take home for most Australians is, didn't we just say no to that? And yes, you did. And now let's weld that gate shut. And the final thing that I wanted to say is just the great respect I have for all you crew on this call, but everyone who pitched in at this pivotal time, and the amazing results that people, like, seriously outgunned financially and everything, pulled together and made great things happen to stop bad things from happening.
That is a beautiful way to take us out. We're right at the top of the hour. Just know, folks, I know that we kind of, it's not a mixed message, but it's a more complex message than just coming on and celebrating a win. We collectively, and the people that we know, the people we've just worked with for the last 18 months or so, we are the first line of defense on stopping this nightmare thing coming back. I know there's a couple of folk from Japan on the call, or people who've spent time there, who know the impact of what happens when you let this industry get away. And we just cannot afford to lose any more time or to take on that threat. So it really is on us. You see this thing stirring again, we will show up again, maybe the kids, and knock it back on its ass again, like we've just done. And in the meantime, there's a lot of work to be done, but do savor and do celebrate and do acknowledge what we just managed to pull off, because we were up against a lot. It was just us. I'm very proud of us all. Thanks again for joining us. Keep an eye out on Don't Nuke the Climate for more news, on Nuclear Plume if you want to look at the maps and read the extraordinary briefing material that Jim and others produced. Stay in touch. Don't go too far away. And don't forget to get a bit of rest. Stay hydrated. Lots of love. We'll see you before long.